Okay, let me introduce to you our discussants.
토론자는 네 분이십니다.
There are 4 panel members as part of the discussion session. First, we have Professor Suhan Woo of the Department of International Logistics at Chungang University. He is a well-published professor, has a lot of papers written, and participated very actively in academic conferences, such as this one. He is indeed an active scholar in the maritime industry. Next panelist is Mr. Yoon Soo Ha from the Busan Development Institute. Now, Dr. Ha, again, is a noted name here in the Busan area. And Jong Chol Choi, EVP of HMM. I understand we're supposed to prepare, have a break for about 15 minutes, so it's not seen in this room right now. I think he's out for a break. But anyhow, now Mr. Choi actually oversaw the technical project in that large-scale shipbuilding project at HMM. He indeed a legendary figure in the industry. And last but not least, we have William Peng, Managing Director of PSA International of China office. And of the 2 presenters, we have Dr. Stopford with us, joining us live online. 네, 그리고 Grayling.
Thank you for joining us. We really appreciated your presence here and your presentations. And very much, both of you, Dr. Stopford and Mr. Grayling, your presentation was very much instructive, informative, and helped us a lot to understand the new trend of and new threat in shipping industry. And we really appreciate that. 그래서 한 분 한 분.
So with that, we will move on to the discussion and go in the order. We'll begin with Mr. Wu.
So I am Woo Soo-han, professor of Chungang University. I really enjoy the presentation today, especially the Dr. Martin Stopford. I studied your book, so it's indeed my honor to meet you, though virtually. So the speakers today, they talked about the environment regulations and how shipping industry can respond to, how port authorities respond, and also what kind of technologies we need, as well as the strategies of liners and shipping companies. The title of this session is Environment Regulation and Digitalization. So I would like to compare these 2 different fields, so environment and digital. And when we talk about responses can be made in multiple layers, so at government level, the corporate level, and so on. As mentioned by speakers, for the past 10 years, we have had a lot of discussions on carbon neutrality, and still uncertainty lies, and many things still have to be decided. But anyway, IMO recently devised the initial strategy, and the countries adopted them as their national law. So I believe that the countries around the world are moving in one direction. And shipbuilders, they're going to build the new ships based on EEDI. They built based on EEDI. And in year 2020, IMO came up with another regulation to strengthen the threshold for the low sulfur content. So environment regulation will continue to step up and be strengthened, but companies already have experiences and they learn the lessons. So in that sense, I think uncertainty is somehow diminished. And the shipping companies, marine equipment manufacturers, as well as IT companies, they are also creating new technologies and opening up the new possibilities. And now, what we have to focus on, as mentioned by the Mr. Chris Grayling, together with the technological development, there is also the problem of the technology gap between different countries as well as the different companies. So how can we address this issue? To address this problem, I believe that we have to redefine the role of government. And IMO, currently they focus on regulations and strengthening of regulations. But I believe that IMO has to make more aggressive efforts to reduce technology gap, maybe with the ODA program. So environment, we have made a lot of transitions and we have changed our views, like how to develop green fuels. But I believe our approaches have been still somehow conventional. And as the uncertainties get removed, I think that the direction that we have to head toward is becoming clear. But digitalization is a different field, and there are many, many differences. So why do you have to pursue digitalization? The motivation by and of itself is still not clear. And also benefits that we can garner is not clear. And also like companies from production to logistics, depending on the businesses they are in, the way they pursue digitalization are all different. And shipping companies, in what way should they pursue digitalization? And where can we get the fund for digitalization? These are the areas where uncertainties still remain very high. So for example, like retailers, they utilize the SNS and platform economy to increase their sales. And asset-based companies such as the manufacturers and the storage companies, they focus more on internal automation to maximize the profits. And there are also some companies who try to utilize AI with the big data. Uh, but still, it's not really clear what kind of benefits that they can get. And also the benefits vary by industries. And the port and maritime sectors, they also have some public, it's for public good as well. And we do have some framework for digitalization for port. The framework is still clear. It's pretty clear, but the shipping companies are different. That there are a lot of uncertainties. And also, let's say that the shipping companies try to adopt the IoT, and they have to purchase equipment, and they have to share data. Now the question is where the cost comes from, and who takes responsibility. Who will pay for a service for information sharing? So these are still not clear. So in this situation, I think that the government and also the shipping company, they're still struggling to set the direction for digitalization. In other words, they are still not clear where they should go forward. And also, so put in summary, environment issues, they can be dealt with mainly based on regulations. Of course, later we will have more market-based measures, but the regulation will be the mainstream. And for the technological development, we need government support, at least in the initial phases. And also, we have to try to address the technology gap. But the digitalization, because of the strategic uncertainty that exists today, you see like Hapag-Lloyd or Musk, these companies are well prepared for digitalization, but small companies, they are not prepared at all. So this gap between the advanced companies and the immature companies will continue to be widened. And also this is where the government response is very difficult to be expected. So this is something that I think we have to work on and we have to find solutions. And regarding that, I do have a question to Dr. Martin Stopford. So you talked about the digitalization and you talked about the importance of the human resource development. And so the shipping companies, when they pursue the digitalization, do you have any advice that you can offer to them for more effective digitalization?
After we finish all discussions here, and each speaker will be asked to answer the question raised by the discussant. So you don't have to answer right away, but later on, after we finish our discussions here, you will be given an opportunity. Right. 다음은 우리 허윤수.
Now, with that, we'd like to invite Dr. Yoon Soo Ho. Yes, hello. My name is Yoon Soo Ho from Busan Development Institute. We have globally famous presenters talking about the global relationship and cooperation in the shipping industry. So I'm a part of the Busan Development Institute, which is a research institute dealing with maritime regulations and the way forward for the regional community, some of the challenges and ideas that are being mulled over by the local community, and some issues that we have not dwelt on in detail have not been covered in the earlier presentation, so allow me to focus on these topics. Now, as you know, the city of Busan here in Korea, we have the coastal lines, the oceans, and it appears that fine dust, environmental issues, and ocean pollution is not a big issue for us, but actually we are fourth in terms of the worst pollution here in Korea. So if you actually measure the level of pollution at our institute, the pollutants released by the ships at the ports are actually quite serious, becoming very grave issues for the local community. And the containers, the trailers, they also produce a lot of particulate matter, further aggravating the air pollution crisis in our city. Now, the old port of Busan Port, if that port is the only one processing huge amounts of throughput without the help of the new port, I think the situation will even further deteriorate in terms of environmental concerns. Now, we talked about the global shipping companies. Now, their commitment and dedication to net zero targets and their energy conscious practices. But as with other port cities, the city of Busan is faced with a lot of challenges, a lot of homework to do. And in the earlier presenter talked about the carbon-free strategy, utilizing hydrogen or ammonia. And by 2050, about 70% of the total ship fleet will be eco-friendly or green ships. And according to McKinsey, ammonia will be used for long-haul ships, and for hydrogen, that will be used for the short haul. But we also have to think about the connection onshore as well. And at this point, the local governments are not fully equipped with the know-how and the resources to link offshore and onshore energy utilization from a maritime or shipping standpoint. And we here at the city of Busan are mulling over a lot of options. And as Mr. Nam of the Busan Port Authority has mentioned, there's the issue of the container terminals located in the new port and as well as the old Busan port. The digitalization of equipment and energy efficiency use. There are a lot of ideas that are being generated at the port, so we are working with the new port to make things more eco-friendly. And there's also a new airport to be built in Gajokdo. And that airport project will also dictate the need for eco-friendly energy sources. So what we are mulling over has to do with the energy bunkering terminal in the new port here in Busan, so that we'll be able to extract hydrogen, use that as power generation to provide the energy requirement for the new airport to be built. And if we are to provide electrical energy to the airport later on, then the energy cycle at the airport will pretty much be self-sufficient in a circular economy. And previously, ports were focused on containers, but we have to take into account environmental regulations and factor in net zero policies. So the port and the container terminals have to be brought into the larger picture in an integrated framework for the sake of environmental causes. I spoke of hydrogen energy sources, but there's also other technologies, carbon capture and storage, the CCUS technology. This also can be applied at the ports as well to produce new energy sources by utilizing carbon capture technology. So if we have to factor in all of these different ideas and emerging technologies, then the ports will not only be the center of transportation, but it will also be the center of utilizing renewable energy, and then that has to be taken into account at this stage of designing new ports. And secondly, well, the topic of this session is environmental regulation and digitalization, so allow me to touch upon that point with the situation here in Busan. Now, for the shipping companies or the larger companies in Korea in the maritime industry, they are pretty well off in terms of digitalization progress. So the core technologies in this fourth industrial revolution are key to corporate competitiveness, obviously. Previously, IT was a weapon, and today, IT is a necessity. And the large corporates are taking the lead with their advanced IT digital technology. However, in Port or Busan, many of the shipping companies are not financially well off. And when the larger companies go ahead of the herd in terms of digitalization, then what would happen to the smaller companies that are engaged in the shipping industry, bunkering, ship repair business, or other outsourcing services? These smaller businesses, will they be able to successfully digitalize? Well, in my view, I think that digitalization will not happen successfully for these smaller companies within the next decade. Of course, they will require support, and the larger companies could play a part, but the smaller companies really need digitalization for efficient and competitive business. So if the leading big companies are successful and the smaller companies are not in terms of digital transformation, that would not be an ideal case. And the gap is even more severe here in Busan because much of the larger companies are located in the capital city of Seoul, and the smaller, lesser financially well-off companies are based here in Busan, according to our survey. So even in this sector, the large corporates and the SMEs should have to work together, cooperate for joint prosperity. And in closing, last but not least, in reality, smart ports, digitalization. If all of these actually happens, that is likely to lead to a decrease in jobs. And as Mr. Damas mentioned earlier, the port union is protesting against digitalization in fear of job losses, hence delaying the project. So we have to have ideas as to how to address this issue of job decline or job losses with the onset of digitalization. Now, when the younger people ask me this, I mentioned the movie Hidden Figures. It deals with scientists working at NASA when they were shooting up Apollo. That was when the IBM supercomputer was first used. And the NASA workers were manually putting in mathematical formulas and calculations in the supercomputer to launch Apollo, according to that movie. So with digitalization, we should not fear job loss, but actually think about creating new, different kinds of jobs. So there may be a lot of opportunities to create quality jobs instead, so that the younger population in the local community will be ever more competitive and in connection to the logistics and maritime industry. This will pose as a great plus and positive. Thank you. Yes, later on, Professor or Dr. Hao and Mr. Nam, would you like to add your input later on? Thank you.
Next, we would like to hear from the Choi Jong-chul, EVP of ATMM, for his comment. Yes, so as introduced, my name is Choi Jong-chul from ATMM. I am very honored to be part of this panel discussion. The topic of our today's discussion is environmental regulation and digitalization. I believe that these could be the two big buzzwords for the shipping industry for next few years. So digitalization and decarbonization, these two D are the biggest buzzwords as well as the biggest challenges for the shipping industry to overcome. If we fail to respond to these two challenges, then we will not be able to survive in the fierce global competition. So from the shipping company's perspective, I'd like to talk about the current status and also the aspirations that ATMM does have. First, regarding digitalization, ATMM is recognized as a leading shipping company for digitalization. Even long time ago, we have established our own system to analyze the energy efficiency of vessels on a real-time basis by combining the traditional shipping engineering and fluid dynamic analysis as well as the big data analysis technology. And last year, 24,000 TEU container vessels that we delivered. This is the world's largest in its size, and for the first time in Korea, it acquired the class notation of Level 3 autonomous operation. This year, we established the Integrated Control Center, where we have the real-time monitoring of various information, including navigation, speed, weather, the radar, ACTIS, and onboard CCTV. And we can also monitor all the information about cargoes on board as well as equipment and the operational status. Regarding this integrated control center, I would like to share with you my own personal experience. When we submitted the idea of establishing this digital integrated control center, at the time, people agreed to its imperativeness and goal, but when it comes to technical feasibility, there were a lot of doubts and suspicions. However, this control center was established, and I was personally amazed by how everything can be shared on a real-time basis. And a lot of external experts visited our control center, and they were also surprised. And one thing that I noticed was that these external experts, when they visited the Integrated Control Center of HMM, they naturally connect the Integrated Control Center with the unmanned autonomous vessel operations. But what I would like to emphasize today is that the goal of this state-of-the-art command control center is not to replace manned operation and human crews. Rather, to the contrary, this center was established to support decision-making for crews. Traditionally, decision-making on board is mainly made by highly experienced captains and chief engineers. However, today the situation is different. Vessel size has grown significantly, and rigorous environmental regulations sparked new technologies that we never experienced. Today, all the important decisions on board, they cannot be made inside the vessels. Rather, the important decisions have to be made in the process of information sharing with the terrestrial office real time. So onboard and on-land cooperation is critically required. And with technological development, autonomous vessel will be realized in the future. But the final destination of digitalization doesn't really have to be an autonomous vessel. A few years ago, the editorial of the Lloyd list said that the autonomous ship does not necessarily mean unmanned vessel. Rather, it can mean a different, new type of manned vessel. And I completely agree with this. So, rather than focusing on unmanned vessel by and of itself, we have to focus our efforts on developing enabling technologies, including sensing, monitoring, control, and analysis technologies to realize autonomous vessels. Next, decarbonization. Last July, the Korea hosted the P4G summit. And during the P4G summit, there was a special session focusing on maritime and marine environment. And in this session, HMM made a pledge to realize carbon neutrality by year 2050. And various efforts have been underway since then in order to achieve carbon neutrality. We are currently working with institutes in Korea to have the demonstrator project for biofuel. We are also reviewing the possibility of commercializing ammonia fuel, and we are also working on developing hydrogen fuel. And not just the HMM, other global carriers and liners, they are also making similar efforts. For example, like they conduct tests for biofuel, and they place order for LNG and methanol fueled ships. However, still we have a long way to go to achieve the IMO reduction target. Fossil fuel-based ships still represent more than 70% of the new build order. The reason that ship owners are reluctant is because of uncertainty. Technological uncertainty, uncertainty in fuel prices, uncertainty in bunker infrastructure, as well as the uncertainty in regulations. Depending on whether it's well to wake or tank to wake, the fuel will have different prices and different regulations. And also, depending on regulations, the fuels will have different commercial values. And also, there are big uncertainty in methane as well, and in terms of regulations. And therefore, unless these regulation uncertainties are removed, some carriers announced that they are not going to place a new order for new vessels. So I believe that the Korean government and international community should work together in order to address this regulation uncertainty as soon as possible. So far I have talked about the lineage perspective on digitalization and decarbonization. There is a big common factor between digitalization and decarbonization, which is that technology is the key to achieve these two. And in this sense, I believe that Korea has excellent environment. So Korea does have the world's best shipbuilder, as well as the equipment manufacturer, and we also have the research institute and academia, which are engaged very actively in various R&D projects. And therefore, faced with these challenges of digitalization and decarbonization, we are very well positioned to take that into an opportunity. However, we shouldn't focus too much only on technological development. Let me give you the example of the LNG fueled ships. So, as a person who experienced the managing LNG carrier for decades, I deeply understand how dangerous LNG is and how much expertise and capacity are required for careful operation. So the biggest barrier for LNG for the development of the LNG fueled ship is to secure seasoned crews with high experience and knowledge. So technological development is important, but I think we also have to think about how to train and secure crews so that they can successfully deal with all these new technologies. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So Mr. Choi, he mentioned that the automation does not necessarily mean unmanned operation, whether it's the ports or ships. In fact, if we could make the maximum use of the small number of human crews, sometimes it could be better for productivity. So I think that we have to accommodate all these different views on the definition of the automation.
됩니다. Mr.
We will invite Mr. William Peng.
Could you kindly share your wisdom with us?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you to the presenters for their sharing. I'm William Pang from PSA International, China office. Today, it is especially relevant in the sense that we are talking about the environment as well as sustainability, as well as digitalization. PSA, in our last 2 years, we have 4 major focus. First, on our core business, container terminals, then our new business, cargo solutions, and the third focus we have been looking at is digitalization, and the fourth focus on sustainability, very related to the topics that we have been talking about in the last 2 hours. On the topic of digitalization, one of the presenters has actually touched very extensively on our Tuas terminal, mega terminal in Tuas, on the digitalization that's being done there. So I will not actually be touching very much on that. Instead, I would like to share some of the things that we have been doing on sustainability as a GTO, a global terminal operator, and how we have been targeting, setting targets in terms of our sustainability targets for the environment. Back in 2019, 2020, PSA actually set a target that we want to reduce our carbon footprint by 50% by the year 2030. And by year 2040, 75%, and by year 2050, we wanted to be carbon neutral. And from then to last year, we are happy to report that some of our terminals, or in fact our terminals in China, have been able to achieve shifting of scope 1 energy to scope 2, 97%, more than 97% of our current RTG have already been electrified. All right, and on top of that, in the last 2 years, we have been starting to convert our prime movers to electrify them. A lot of our terminals are now starting to add on LNG prime movers and electric prime movers. For example, in Guangzhou, we have acquired electric prime movers. In Antwerp, we have started an electric straddle carrier. And so we are trying to move our carbon footprint from S1 to S2, scope 1 to scope 2. All right. On top of that, in some of our terminals, for example, we are also starting to use renewable energy. In Tianjin, for example, we have started to look at using of wind energy to power up our terminal. PSA, we have a joint venture company, joint venture container terminal in Tianjin, where we are planning to start wind turbine, 2 wind turbines, which will power up the terminal starting from next year. And we would expect that with that, the terminal will actually be zero carbon, all right, zero carbon terminal when it is fully deployed with renewable energy. So those are the directions that we are taking as a GTO to be responsible for what we are doing to the environment. At the same time, I would also like to add that in the area of coal ironing and shore power, all our terminals in China, for example, are equipped with coal ironing. 50% of the berth are actually equipped with coal ironing. Unfortunately, and sad to say, the utilization, although we have 50% of the berth equipped with it, the utilization remains very low. Right? Very often, the ships are not willing to use the coal ironing, and in fact, the deployment of vessels with coal ironing facilities are also not high. So this is one area that I suggest that we could all be looking at to improve the coal ironing utilizations in the terminal. Last but not least, I'd like to add that in terms of digitalization for some of our terminals for sustainability, Tuas, for example, our Tuas terminal in PSA Singapore, I'd like to share that we have actually a joint venture with a smart energy company that does the what we call a smart energy system that will allow us to manage the peak and lull of our terminal operations, to conserve energy, to store up the energy that we are generating during the lull, and to reuse those energy during the peak. All right, and we believe that with this technology, we should be able to do it for most of our terminals and better manage the energy usage in our terminals. Yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we all finished the discussions, and each discussant raised a question, and the speaker will answer the question raised by each discussant. And first, I'd like to invite Dr. Stopford to answer the question raised by Professor Wu.
Yes, thank you so much, Chairman. The question raised was what advice might we have for small companies who are trying to adopt digitalization? And this, I think, is one of the most important questions. The whole ability of the shipping companies to work together with the shore-based facilities and with each other and with their offices is vital. And in fact, Mr. Pang made exactly the same thing with his last comments about coal downing, that the fact that you can set up coal downing facilities but need to coordinate with the ships at some stage so that they're actually able and to use it. The advice that's, the importance of the ship size question, or the digital question, is very substantial when we look at shipping companies, because we've got over 20,000 shipping companies with an average of only 7 ships each, and so a lot of companies have very small staff bases. And I think all that one can say about this is that, first of all, we should start to plan more training and development courses for young and mid-career people in order to train them in the use of both digital engineering and marine operations. We need those two things together. They tend not to be together, and at the moment, I think that's the first very important issue. And then I think the companies need to take a fairly long-term view about how important it is to build up these sort of people within the organisation, both on board ship and on land, and to move towards more integrated operations so that we stop talking about crew and shore and we start to talk about the sort of horizontal organisations which you see in Silicon Valley. So those are my comments, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you. 여러분들 통역 다 들으셨죠? 그대로입니다.
Next.
Though there's no particular questions to you regarding the climate change, the environmental issue, and let me ask you the one question then. Obviously, in November in Glasgow, COP26 going to be held, and people say they're introduced more ambitious plan imposed on each participating country to regulate for the climate change. What do you prospect of the outcome of that meeting, Mr. Grayling?
Well, good morning or good afternoon, and it's good to be here with you all today. I think the simple answer is nobody's quite certain. It's not going to be easy. There is clearly a desire to reach a successor agreement to Paris. Paris set us only in a direction. What this conference is designed to do is to really get major nations to agree firm action plans for the reduction of carbon. I think it's pretty clear that there will be a real push to get everyone to accept net zero by 2050. I think it's more difficult to get people to set interim targets for carbon reductions for 2030 or 2035. From the point of view of the maritime sector, I'm expecting perhaps less of an agreement directly related to the maritime sector, but more a framework of policy around the world within which the maritime sector has to fit. So if we do reach an agreement that accepts broadly net zero for 2050, and action plans to get there, then the task of the maritime sector is going to be to deliver that within the industry. We're already seeing moves towards the regulation of the sector towards net zero. The European Union has, as I said in my remarks, has now legislated to include the maritime sector in its emission trading scheme. There's now serious talk about market-based measures across the sector. So I think what the COP summit will do is create a framework within which the maritime sector has to then meet its own goals. What I'm absolutely sure is that whilst up to now, international shipping has stayed outside the agreements that have existed and the individual policy decisions in countries. That's not going to be the case going forwards. So the European Union was the first to do this. I expect the United States to follow soon, the United Kingdom to follow soon, and the challenge for the shipping sector is going to be, I think now, to accelerate the work that's taking place. We know it's not easy because the technological solutions are not absolutely clear. We've heard a bit about that earlier, but there is no doubt that change is going to be necessary, and it will be regulated. It was interesting, the point made by Mr. Pang about shipping companies not using cold ironing facilities when they're there. I think very quickly that's an example of where regulation is going to require it. That ships will simply not be able to move around the world to unload in ports without being required to use shore power. And so I think the industry should expect not direct rules from Glasgow saying this is what you have to do, but a framework within which it has to change fairly quickly, and individual countries are going to regulate pretty quickly. As I said in my remarks, though, my own view is that it is better to do this on a global basis through the IMO than simply do it piecemeal, country by country.
Thank you very much. 남 교수님, 예, 말씀해 주세요.
Professor Nam, please.
허윤수 박사.
So, Dr. He's comments, I really agree with this, especially the local government and the port authorities. There is a big separation. So I think that that's a stumbling block behind the expansion of environment-friendly policies throughout the city. So city government and port authorities, they must join hands together and establish the environment strategy together. And also the energy supply in port authority. In fact, Japan already set the example that the port authority can supply energy. For example, like the Busan New Port, we also have the site dedicated for the LNG bunkering. But the LNG, it's just an interim fuel. It's a temporary solution. And the supply and demand of the alternative fuel still remain uncertain. And therefore, regarding the energy supply, Port Authority does have a lot of uncertainties, and therefore we cannot really establish specific plan. So the LNG bunkering site, maybe in the future it can be hydrogen-based or other alternative fuels can be utilized. And therefore, this bunkering site, I think, has to be flexible enough to accommodate different kinds of fuels. And also regarding the digitalization of small-scale companies, and also their struggle for digitalization. So in order to address this problem, Busan does have the industry association, and PPA provides financial assistance to this association, and they develop and discover the tasks and solve the problem together. And therefore, I believe that for the small-scale companies, we have to provide more public assistance so that they can pursue digitalization together with developed advanced companies. And also the human operation and versus digitalization. This is something that we have discussed for a long time, and I understand that the LA port experienced the conflicts. And so I think that the labor union and employer, they have to work together and they have to identify opportunities for new jobs. And also the trainings and education programs should be provided properly to human resources so that the existing workers will not have like anxiety or concerns about losing their jobs.
우리 최 과장님 특별히 말씀하시겠습니다. 네.
Now, Mr. Choi, do you have anything to add? Well, the panel members have not directed their questions to myself per se, but if I may add my 2 cents to elaborate on what I've mentioned as part of my presentation. As you know, IMO in 2018 announced carbon reduction plans by 2050 vis-a-vis 28, and after IMO's announcement, the Republic of Korea in 2018 has enacted a law on the development and deployment of eco-friendly ships, and the laws are currently being implemented. And government agencies late last year established a basic plan to implement in detail the laws. And we also launched an R&D project covering the entire cycle of green ship development and supply. And as many presenters have mentioned, in the maritime industry, IMO is taking the leadership in formulating a lot of regulations, which is likely to have a grave impact on many of the shipping companies within the larger industry. And of course, these companies are formulating internal plans and measures to respond to IMO-driven regulations. But also the government are undertaking a lot of projects from a national governmental angle. And one of the reasons why we're developing eco-friendly or green ships is because we need to dramatically reduce CO2 emissions coming from the vessels. And actually, the best and perhaps the only way is to use carbon-free fuel. Hydrogen and ammonia are leading examples. Now, the leading countries around the world are undertaking very ambitious R&D projects in this direction to utilize carbon-free fuels. But this is not a short-term goal. It'll take time. And currently, we will try to get at the low-hanging fruit first in terms of what's technologically feasible. So we may consider hybrid technologies, hybrid fuels, combining carbon-free fuel. So I mentioned this in the presentation, and we've spoken about LNG, and as Mr. Che has mentioned, LNG cannot be the alternative for us, but given current technology where it is, the electric power driven ships and hybrid fuel ships are the options that we have for LNG ships at present. And another option would be ethanol, bioenergy, and LPG. And there's also renewable energy, such as wind energy sources that are being developed, but the technology that can be applied to ships in the more nearer term will be these that I mentioned in the shorter run. So we are continuing our efforts on this front, but we have to go beyond and above that through active R&D, so that will become a forerunner in technological development and commercialization, so that in the end, not only the large companies, but the smaller shipping companies were able to take advantage of that technology to build greener and more eco-friendly ships in the future. Thank you. Thank you for that. There are no questions that came through via YouTube or online. But before I wrap up, I'd like to thank our foreign speakers in English.
Mr. Stopford, Mr. Grayling, Mr. Pang, we appreciate deeply the time with you, and thank you again for sparing your valuable time. Well, now we are going to finish this session. Goodbye for now. 여러분, 박수 부탁드리겠습니다.
So please give them a big hand. Once again, I would like to thank the speakers and also discussants for their active, passionate participation, and also for their valuable contribution. Why don't you give them another round of applause? Thank you. Now we are going to conclude the session. Once again, I'd like to thank the organizing committee of the World Ocean Forum for their efforts to put together this great forum. With that, thank you.